Let's start with this slide. What is the difference between a honeycomb produced by bees and a honeycomb board produced by humans? I will start with Kant. He says that although bees are not machines and act through representations, they do not produce through a capacity for choice that grounds their actions in reason, that is through freedom, but only by their nature, by instinct, says Kant. Instead, every product of human art, in the generic sense of techne, presupposes a freedom of choice. Over 200 years later, the response of an evolutionary psychologist like Michael Tomasello is not very different. Of course, Tomasello's thesis is much more articulate and draws more detailed distinction between different animal species. But the behavior of insects also remain linked for Tomasello to their evolved biology, which Kant called instinct. Primates, writes Tomasello, and other mammals seem to be more intelligent than smaller scale creatures such as insects. The issue is not complexity, the complexity of their productions, but their products, but control. Even when they are doing something highly complex, the behavior of ants and spiders and bees does not seem to be under the individual's control. Their evolved biology is in control. In contrast, even when they are doing something relatively simple, primates and mammals seem to be making active and informed decisions that are at least somewhat under the individual's control. For some time now, I've been trying to understand the nature of control, its relationship to experience, and in particular, aesthetic experience, artistic practices, and our forms of life. For Tomasello, humans are the animals that not only have all the levels of control of other species, but also take socially or morally normative parameters into account when planning, monitoring, and modifying the course of their actions. Thus, meta-operatively, this is not a term used by Tomasello. He talks about meta-cognition, meta-action. Meta-operationality or meta-operativity was introduced by Emilio Garroni different decades ago, but I think there are similarities. So thus meta-operatively intervening on other tiers. This is a table by Tomasello that summarizes the situation. It's now, I don't want you to read it all, but I can leave it there. There are, the most elemental level, and then Tomasello calls great apes rational agents because he justifies this attribution of rationality to great apes. They have metacognition, etc. But the difference with the normative agents, the human, is that they have a perspective of flexibility and also a social normative self-regulation. For instance, the question of shame, according to Tomasello, regards only human because of the control, the normative control, and all the levels of feedbacks, let's say. But this is what happens on a time scale of millions of years. The control mechanisms available to the human species can be observed in their use that certain societies make of them over much shorter spans of time. For example, from the point of view of social, economic, and technological history, 30 years ago, the historian James Benninger published a book called The Control Revolution, technological economic origins of the information societies, where his main thesis is that society is currently experiencing a revolutionary transformation on a global scale. I trace the causes, he says, of change back to the middle and late 19th century, to a set of problems, in effect, a crisis of control generated by the Industrial Revolution in manufacturing and transportation. The response to this crisis, at least in technological innovation and restructuring of the economy, occurred most rapidly around the turn of the century, and amounted to nothing less, I argue, than a revolution in societal control. Of course, Marxist scholars disagree with this analysis, but the question of control remains central. Here, I'm not interested in the soundness of Benniger's thesis, but I'm interested in the symptomatic value of this statement in attesting to a growing awareness of the way that human and non-human control mechanisms exert on our lives. My starting assumption, which I think it's quite obvious, is that in our societies, the mechanisms of control by individual or institutional agents on the most diverse domain, psychological, environmental, political, financial, seem to have become problematic. The word control is on everyone's lips. We're all experiencing the controlling and self-controlling effects of our digital devices. New forms of capillary surveillance, but also situations that are beyond control, while the conviction is growing that the great crises we are experiencing have no direction, not even occult. Occult direction is the secret hope of conspiracy theorists, who would find meaning, in all the world's events. However, as a character of a movie, of a catastrophist movie, Leave the World Behind, says to Julia Roberts, the truth is scarier than a conspiracy, is that no one is in control. The movie, the director of the movie is Sam Esmail, and it was produced by Michelle and Barack Obama, who apparently intervened in the script and very actively. So over the past few months, I have casually picked up a few headlines that mention the word control. Here are a few examples from the New York Times and The Guardian. You can take a look, but let us return to Tomasello, for whom the decisive difference between the species lie in the way individuals act and produce, not in the material complexity of their products. As we said, Tomasello does not provide an explicit definition of control, but presents it as a progressive four-step complication of a cybernetical model. There is a basic structure that he attributes to lizards, for instance. There are goal-directed actions, and then with a very elemental feedback control, the lizards can decide to eat the fly or to leave it alone because there is another predator, for instance. But this is all of nothing, no? It's and then there is a progressive complication of the meta levels of control, so the mammals, the great apes, and then the humans who have all these levels, and also, as we said, the unique forms of socially shared agencies, which change fundamentally the way that individuals make and self-regulate their decisions. Benniger also draws on cybernetics, proposing a very general definition of control based on two elements. The first one is influence of one agent over another, meaning that the former causes changes in the behavior of the latter. And the second one is purpose, in the sense that influence is directed towards some prior goal of the controlling agent. A similar definition can also be found in this manual. The authors, after recognizing the enormous polysemicity of the word control, stresses 2 points. The first one, there is the idea of control as domination. The person in control is the one who has the power to enforce his will on others. And secondly, there is the idea of control as regulation. Here, the controller detects a difference between what is and what ought to be, and this difference acts as a stimulus for action. These latter definitions overlook the fact that the agent over which control is exercised need not be different from the agent exercising it. There is self-control, self-monitoring. But even that, of course, this is what interests Tomasello, actually. Self-control, self-monitoring, the flexibility that these levels allow a subject to have in relation to the worlds, the others, himself, etc. But even before the cybernetic model, it is in the history of the world, it is the history of the world that tells us something about the basic nature of control. Control derives from the medieval Latin contra rotulus, French contre rôle, control. So a rotulus, a roll, usually of parchment, on which the characters of an earlier rotulus were reproduced to ensure that there were no errors or tampering going on. We therefore have a large family of meanings for the term control. But all these searches leave out two aspects which instead concern the very structure of the experience we have, of our experience. And it is this structure that I am interested in relation to the constitution of our experience in general and of the aesthetic and artistic experience in particular. The first aspect that is overlooked is the possible performative power of control, from being a means for recording and preserving the identity of important documents. Contra rotuli dictate the organization and proper or normal performance of multiple activities and forms of experience, which must be molded to the parameters against which they will be monitored, evaluated, optimized, often losing sight of their primary objectives. Control's function of regulation and evaluation is transformed into that of domination. This perversion is familiar to us. In the field of academic research, we know that it often happens that the formal requirements of publications, quantity, journal ranking, number of citation, etc., count more than their content, who nobody reads. We witness, in short, an inversion between means and ends in this case. But the second question that they overlook, and that interests me more than the first one, is that none of this research on control analyzes the reasons for the need to lower the threshold of control, and yet individual or collective forms of lowering the threshold of control are a universal anthropological fact. A colleague of Tomasello's, Philippe Rochat, they used to work together at Emory, then Tomasello moved to Germany, but they're still in touch, is working on the various ways in which different cultures try to circumvent, to bypass control mechanisms in order to reach rapture, ecstasy. Drugs, psychedelic paraphernalia, and all of the other cultural ritual arrangements that exist around the world are ready-made cultural artifacts offered to individuals to search and reach rapture. They are ultimate means to an irresistible and universal quest for ecstasy. Why do we need reaching rapture, self-abandonment, non-control? And Rochat's hypothesis is that such general human motive may be found in what I consider to be a major trademark of our species, and this trademark is human self-consciousness, and in particular, our mortal sense of finitude. The fact that, like no other animals, we know that we are going to die. In other words, his idea is that such practices would all have in common the basic relief from own built-in sense of internal control to the delegation of control to external forces that are out of the individual's own reason and control, all of it fundamentally motivated, according to Rochat, by the relief from our self-conscious dead-end destiny. Now, here I do not intend to discuss Rochat's hypothesis, but I would like to explore its reverse. That is, we seek to escape certain controlling relationships with ourselves, others, and the world, because we want to feel alive. Feeling alive, however, does not refer to some vital, obscure, vitalistic principle, but to the possibility of having meaningful experiences. From an immediately phenomenological, let's say, point of view, we are inclined to say that an experience makes sense when it gratifies us and does not mortify us and reaches us and does not make us miserable, makes us feel more alive than dead, more intelligent than stupid, more passionate than indifferent, more in touch with other people than lonely, and so on. And that each of these experiences integrates more or less successfully into our life and changes more or less it profoundly. But does the fact that an experience is felt as meaningful depend only on a person's unpredictable, idiosyncratic, transient, and perhaps inscrutable individual reactions? Or on what really, or on what reality randomly offers us? Or instead, do conditions peculiar to each human experience come into play in its constitution, which may develop in definite, concrete ways in their native relationships with the world? So a form of life is characterized by the experiences it fosters or inhibits, but the meaning of the experiences we have in turn shapes the form of life in which we find ourselves immersed. So what degree of control do we have from within our forms of life over the sense of our experience? Does being able to control our relationships with the world, ourselves, and others guarantee their meaning or undermine it? Feeling or believing oneself to be part of a natural cosmic order, a providential plan, or perhaps an inescapable historical progress are attitudes that have been perceived as guarantees of meaning, yet they do not seem to be compatible with the idea of being able to control one's experiences, to be autonomous and free agents. While aware of our interdependence and vulnerability, no one, I believe, seriously wishes to give up autonomy, freedom in its various forms. And yet autonomy and subjective freedom would be mere abstractions, sources of constant frustration, if they never found a hospitable correspondence in the natural and social world. A correspondence that is not random or capricious, which would make us feel at the mercy of circumstances that are always unexpected and lacking, therefore, in any interconnection, but neither guaranteed and systematic, one that would reduce us to its factual element, deprived of any difference, distinction between necessity, possibility, and what is desirable. From a sociological point of view, this problem is the focus of the German sociologist Hartmut Rosa. A short book of his which condenses and summarizes long elaborated analysis has an eloquent title, The Uncontrollability of the World. In a nutshell, Rosa's central thesis is that the driving cultural force of that form of life we call modern, that is, characterized by autonomy, freedom, etc., is the idea, the hope and desire that we can make the world controllable. Yet it is only in encountering the uncontrollable that we really experience the world. Only then do we feel touched, moved, alive. A world that is fully known, in which everything has been planned and mastered, would be a dead world. Rosa develops his thesis by opposing a relationship with the world characterized by a series of points of aggression, a world conceived as a set of objects to be known, mastered, and exploited, to a relationship of resonance. And his first very thick book is dedicated to this notion that has been a long debated and, well, anyway, which occurs when we relate to the world with an attitude of semi-controllability. Semi-controllability does not imply disavowing the necessary role played by control over the environment, exercised by individuals and societies, which remains a necessary condition for making the world reachable. But to recognize first and foremost that there are essential dimensions of human life that are not entirely controllable, and that the indiscriminate attempt to control the uncontrollable leads to an alienated relationship to the world, to the disenchantment evoked by Weber, and paradoxically to a new monstrous uncontrollability. Nuclear power is the example that Rosa, of course, makes easily, because it offers no possibility of resonance in no way. It's invisible, deadly, lethal, etc., etc. So far, I've briefly mentioned different perspectives on what happens out of control, my title, in the two senses of the expression, as that which depends on control, as in the expression out of fear, out of control, and that which is out of control in the usual sense, in the sense that it is beyond our ability to master it. Thomas Allen and Benninger focus on the first sense of the phrase. Rocha and Rosa are interested in valuing the second sense as well. The perspective I propose, and which I began to probe in my book that Regina mentioned before, The Conundrum of Control, is articulated differently. On the one hand, I'm interested in understanding the relationship between control and non-control as a condition of possibility of all meaningful experience, which has its model in aesthetic experience, as Dewey maintained. On the other hand, I wonder whether this condition of possibility in the transcendental or ontological or universally anthropological sense of the world managed to find their working space in our current societies, or whether they are not instead mostly silenced, to put it in analogy, just as certain genes, are silenced under certain environmental conditions, no? The epigenetics part of our. I think it is important to place the condition of possibility of meaningful experience in the concreteness of our social experience, at least of the societies I'm more familiar with, the global north. And to see if aesthetic experience and artistic practices have anything interesting to say about this. I propose two theses, which I will try to elaborate a little bit and justify. The first one: every successful artistic practice arises from an original relationship in which an agentive intentional control is closely intertwined with an uncontrollable unintentional dimension. There is an expression by Adorno significantly used in the Haftbildung essay, which has a lot to do with control and uncontrollability. He says that artistic productivity is the intentional in the unintentional. Künstliche Produktivität ist das Willkürliche ins Unwillkürliche. It's a bit mysterious, but very precise in a way. My second thesis is that many contemporary artistic practices, while unintentionally enacting and showing the original relationship between control and uncontrollability, intentionally offer us works that focus only on one of the two poles of this relationship, mimicking something that concerns the phenomenology, I would say, of our societies, as if their explicit theme, so to speak, belies what they otherwise enact, and vice versa. That is, the deliberate focus on showing only one of the two poles, control or non-control, in its isolation and one-sidedness is called into question, denounced, criticized by the emergence of the original relationship of the two poles that makes the works possible. To put it simply, and perhaps too simplistically, the phenomenological presentation contradicts their ontological foundation and vice versa. In his book, Resonance, Rosa offers many important and agreeable observations in relation to art in our late modern societies, both from the point of view of the artist and the audience. And his general thesis, but he enters into more interesting particulars also relating to the condition of possibility of the resonance and the themes of the work of art. So his general thesis anyway is that what we experience as beauty is the expression of the possibility of a resonant relationship to the world, a possible mode of being in the world in which subject and world respond to each other. Here, however, I would like to propose something more specific. The current social importance of artistic practices is closely linked to the fact that in the form of life of our Western societies, this original relationship from which the two poles of control and non-control emerge is disturbed, suspended, silenced, as I said. The two poles tend to present themselves more and more as unrelated, independent, loosening their ontologically or anthropological original bond on the lived phenomenological level. If this is the case, the consequence is that we are no longer able to learn from experience, and even less from artistic experience. Some artistic practices testify to this situation better than others, even though they cannot but rely for their success on the relationship that is being dissolved. Their testimonial role, however, runs the risk of being exhausting in merely individual experiences, devoid of any effectiveness on the social imaginary, and thus on social and political reality. The risk of a purely individual fruition is what Hannah Arendt already pointed out in The Crisis of Culture in the 60s, that is the use of art and culture as a mere means to cultivate one's own self-perfection. To clarify this thesis, I would like to present a concrete case among the many artists who bring out this discrepancy between the conditions of art's efficacy and the phenomenology of everyday experience. I would like to focus on one in particular, whom I have already dealt at length in my book, Te-Ching Hsieh, more or less, this is the pronunciation, not in Mandarin, but I'm not able to. So he is a secluded artist, I would say, who is increasingly recognized today as having an anticipatory and prescient gaze, and whom perhaps for this reason Marina Abramovich calls the master. Between the 70s and the 80s, in his extraordinary one-year performances series, Hsieh brings out in an exemplary manner certain aspects of the original relationship between control and uncontrollability that allows him to show the divorce that takes place in life between these two poles. Hyper control on the one hand, loss of control on the other. While those performances put that entanglement between control and non-control, I'm using this word because it's the title of the last book by Alban Noah is called Entanglement, and I will deal with it towards the end of the paper. But so while those performances put that entanglement on display as their condition of unintended possibility, they intentionally display the disentanglement that characterizes our individual, social, and institutional lives. These are the four performances of Te-Ching Hsieh. I will refer only to the first one, just a few words about the other ones. So the first one is the cage piece. These are not high quality pictures, but you can see him. Hsieh stipulates in a statement drafted in a strictly legalistic language that he will spend a year in a wooden cage built in his studio without conversing, reading, writing, listening to the radio, or watching TV. A friend will bring him food, clothes, an empty bucket that is used as a latrine. Hsieh will avoid all communication with the public, which will be allowed into his apartment every 21 days to look at him in the cage. In the time clock piece, Hsieh declares in a statement similar to the previous one that he will clock in every hour, leaving the time clock room set up inside his studio again immediately after clocking out. This will prevent him, of course, of sleeping more than 59 minutes at a time and leaving the studio for more than 30 minutes back and forth. The third one, the outdoor piece, consists in living outdoors for an entire year, never entering a building, subway, train, plane, ship, cave, or tent. A year later, Hsieh embarked on a fourth performance, but this time together with the artist Linda Montano. Each of the two performers signed a statement in which they both pledged to remain united for a year by an 8-foot long rope, 2.5 meters, tied around each other's waist without ever touching each other. So at first glance, the cage piece manifests itself as a strict, self-imposed control over the living space, over contacts with the outside, over possible activities and occupations. In the time clock piece, the kind of control being apparently enacted is no longer that of a prison confinement, rather it is the control of time characterizing many types of subordinate work jobs. Unlike these first two performances, the third and the fourth one, the outward piece, seems to shift in the opposite role, giving up all shelter. Cher seems to give up all forms of control over his own daily existence, surrendering himself to the social, legal, atmospheric contingencies of a city like New York. The contract with himself binds him to expose himself to the loss of control over his daily life, even to the point of forcing him to break, as in the case of a brief arrest, the very terms established. A friend of Cher filmed the arrest. Apparently, she happened to be there. The stills from the footage testify to the desperation of Cher, who usually maintains an impassive face, and his futile resistance to the officers dragging him inside the building. Cher's unusual reaction was not motivated by the arrest as such, caused by alleged violation of the law, but by the forced violation of the law that Cher had given himself in his third extreme performance, but also allowed him, the judge, condemned him for disorderly conduct and allowed him to remain outdoors during the hearing. The curator of and the author with Cher of the biggest monograph on Cher, the life works of Touching Cher, Adrian Heathfield, remarks that the rule of the individual artist overrules, and he is right. The judge said the time served were the 15 hours spent in prison during the night of the arrest. And finally, the performance, the fourth performance, the rope piece, bind him to another person, up to the point a stranger, with whom he must negotiate choices, times, activities, and share an intimacy that robs him and her of much of his and her control over himself and herself and their own personal life, mimicking, again, a forced cohabitation or the recognition of a form of dependency embodied physically by the rope that holds them together for a year, while they are prohibited from touching each other, a sort of a noli me tangere, very literal noli me tangere. However, can the cage piece really be placed under the unambiguous signs of self-control? Cher acknowledges there are many things unexpected and out of control in a year. The same can be said of the time clock piece. Will the self-imposed control be sustainable for an entire year? What effects will it have on him, his thoughts, his body, his relationship with others? And symmetrically, the perspective of loosening or relinquishing control, which at first glance is present in the next two performances, the outward piece and the rope piece, can be reversed. The persistence of control over his performance is revealed at the very moment reality takes over, namely the moment of the arrest. The system of recording his performance, the carefully annotated maps, the photographs serve as contrarotuli, attesting to a particular methodical and rigorous system of accounting. Finally, the two person performance of the rope piece is experienced by Shea in a very different way from how it is experienced by his co-performer, Linda Montano, who aimed at a sort of a Zen-like experience, a little bit New Age experience of, but completely different from Shea, who for him it is the performance is a score to be performed under the control of the statements signed by both of them, where the concession made to Montano and even their quarrels, many quarrels, fall squarely within the limited control provided by the performance. So each performance then has a complexity that defies easy collocation. Their enigmatic nature, the character that I would call perhaps gnomic, have deep roots, and their very reticence constitutes their strength. A fifth performance, different from these four, the first four that are very similar in a way. A fifth performance is the prelude to the abandonment of his activity as an artist. Today, Shea lives in Brooklyn with his second or third wife, I don't remember, and he runs a restaurant and a drugstore, I don't know, and but his works are continuing to be exhibited in many venues. So it preludes to the end of his activity as an artist, ends with announcements. The word, the deleted word is the cancelled word is will, of course, no? So Technical plan to do a year performs. I not do art and not talk or art, etc. I will just go in live. The performance will begin, etc. And the performance takes the form of a kind of a performative contradiction. How is it possible, in fact, to simply just will to get on in life? In our terms, it means to control the fact that one's life unfolds without control. It is a rotulus supposedly devoid of any contra-rotulus, which nevertheless must be present and vigilant to witness its own absence. It's a paradox of paradox, of course. So that's why he covered it with the black ink. Here, I will say something more mainly about the first performance to highlight characters that mutatis mutandis apply to all of them. Okay, the cage piece begins on September 1978, ends on September 1979. What remains of this performance are a calendar with an image of the wooden cage. Perhaps I have it here. Yeah, that was the statement, the legalistic statement signed by a lawyer, no, etc. Where 19 dates are circled for the public. A number of photographs of Shea in the cage at different times, standing, lying, or sitting on the coat, crouching on the bucket, washing, etching the passing days on the wall, so transgressing what he put in his rule, never write, etc. 355 photographs taken daily. There is a break of 10 days, so there are some out-of-control events, let's say. These photographs are similar to mugshots, in which Shea always appears dressed in white. I think I have it, yes. Wearing a shirt with his name as an illegal immigrant, Sam Shea. And the starting and closing dates of the performance printed on it. According to Shea, the idea for the performance was born out of the situation as an illegal immigrant, his frustration with the amount of time wasted doing meaningless work, his being a thinking artist, he said, instead of a practicing artist, a frustrated person who stayed in the studio thinking about life and art. These are his words. Shea does not plan the series of performances. However, we may say that Shea frames all his performances in the same line of research. My one-year performances, he writes, present my different perspectives of thinking about life, but they are all under the same premise: life as a life sentence. The statement, constantly repeated by Shea, along with the idea that life is wasting time and doing time, with the ambiguity of being in prison or just doing time, making time, is just as enigmatic as his performances, I would say, which he refuses to elaborate further, leaving each person to activate them for themselves. An invitation to use their own associations, their own imaginative and reflective capacity, guided by what they witness. So the network of relationships that Shea had embodied throughout his trajectory already emerges from this performance. They are all relationships marked by an exaltation of one's own will. What is Decius is will, he writes, and by forces that, and dimensions beyond the subject's control. But it's not a matter of a strong subject's will pitted against inescapable forces and dimensions. Rather, it is a matter of bringing out the web of life, putting it on display, no, I would say, elaborating it and inviting the audience to do the same. One might say that the forces and dimensions that are beyond the control of the subject, existentially and in a specific contingent situation, are the weft of life interwoven with the warp of the subject's will. In Adorno's phrase, no, das Willkürliche ins Unwillkürliche. Indeed, the paradoxical result of the extreme rigor of each performance, carefully designed to be precise and simple with respect to what it renounces and what it puts on display, is to bring out more clearly what is explicitly excluded, the anonymous background of life in its complexity and network of relationship that constitute it. The unit of measurement of one-year performances is a temporal dimension that is further distant from human control, cosmic time. Life is calculated, reported, controlled based on the movement of the Earth, also used to mark human time, bureaucratic, legal, productive, etc., according to that mechanism already considered, whereby the ways of recording life tend to become prescriptions for conducting it. In order to present life, the cosmic time, it must also be linked to another dimension of time that escapes the control of one's field, that is biological time. Shea begins each one-year performance with a shaved head, and the photographic record shows day after day the growth of hair. This is the first and the last one. And yet, cosmic time seems more psychologically manageable if it is recorded spatially. And Shea allows himself to transgress the self-imposed rule or not writing anything down by etching the passage of days on the wall of his cage with a countdown. A similar need for imaginary control is exercised over space. He tries to expand his cell into the dimension of a city. I quote, "I treated the corner with my bed as home, and the other three corners were outside. I would take a walk outside and then come home," in 3 meters, square meters, more or less. To provide a space and time for the unexpected, to create conditions, even rigidly bounded conditions, to give space and time to what we cannot be controlled or predicted in its effects, is what must happen in any successful works of art, which is never simply, we know, the illustration of an intention, a statement, a set of rules, but something determined and circumscribed through which an indeterminate totality of relationships is displayed. I believe that Shea is fully aware of this dual status of his performances, as any other work or artistic practice. As he said, you could see my work in some part as being about or representing the legal immigrant, the refugee, or the homeless person, but I don't think of art from this view. I think of it as being about the struggling life, and I'm inside it. You could say the work is about this or about that. It is not about something only. It continues to be open. It is possible for you to see it in many ways, but in many ways that cannot mean a simple addition of determined themes, no, like about this or about that, nor in any way, and it is certainly not unimportant that the performances follow those rules and not others, that it takes shape through voluntary confinement in a sealed cage, that the lawyer certifies it, etc., etc., etc. But through these particular elements, the challenge of the performance is to present life itself, the struggle in life, not any particular struggle, political, social, legal, and so on. This is why Shea also speaks simply of this intent of presenting life, where presenting life or the struggle in life is at once a way of addressing the question of what is closest to the origin of art, quoting from Shea. What is closest to the origin of art lies precisely in the attempt to show the weave of life in which the subject's work is always already immersed and interwoven, and I'm inside it, no? In the very act of experiencing it, without the distraction, so to speak, of other purposes or of a specific aboutness. Each performance, as we have mentioned, seems to thematize exclusively one of the two poles of the enhancing interplay between control and non-control. However, it is as if we were faced with two levels, two possible receptions, the first of which exposes and mimics one of the aspects of social life, while the second shows and criticizes its one-sidedness. Indeed, on a first level, it is easy to grasp the dramatic divorce that the two poles manifest in everyday life, in the societies to which belong, in its dysfunctions exhibited mimetically. On the other hand, precisely because of their thematic isolation, as if they were a sterile laboratory environment, Shea is nevertheless able to show on a second, more original level, I would say, how the two poles cannot be separated, how they are intimately intertwined. In contrast to the unreflective life in which they are experienced, bipolarly, I would say, the apparent monothematic isolation paradoxically allow their spiraling to emerge. From within life, something takes shape that unfolds simultaneously with it, without confusing life and art. From these performances then emerges their authentic aboutness, the display of the secret relationship between a torn and divided life represented in the tendentially incommunicative poles of control and uncontrollability, and an experience from which their essential nexus emerges. A nexus that is fragile, lived blindly, or even silenced, but which marks life in its complexity. This usually silence dimension becomes visible in that here time is manifestly wasted. This is precisely why it is demanding. Shea writes, I had no work to do, so I had more work to do. Or again, I had to let time waste in order to prove how hard I was working. I'm about to go towards the conclusion, don't worry. But just a word about his second one-year performance piece, the time clock piece, because it offers another mimetic foreshadowing of our current situation. An artist, Tim Etchells, writes to share, and he says, if capitalism structures are repeated in your work, they are mirrored without the key element of productivity, a perfect model of late capitalism, perhaps in its productless purity, no? Because thought, paradoxically made free, according to Scher, by the deprivation experience in the cage piece, here it is subservient to a system of accounting, self-control, and self-surveillance, which almost totally occupy the space of maneuver. The fixed thought is meeting the deadline, clocking in every 59 minutes, every 60 minutes. Here, accountability does not play its supposed ancillary role of controlling an activity that has other purposes, but takes the whole stage. It is accountability, a permanent state of alertness that refers only to itself. We might again find one or more themes in this frightening performance, not only the understanding of much of the work done today as bullshit jobs, as Graeber said, but control exposed in its purity as exercised only to control itself. To conclude, I'd like to pick up on the reference I made to Alban Noe. His basic idea, expressed in Strange Tools, is that our life is a set of organized activities, from breastfeeding to dancing, from talking to making images. These organized activities are a second nature that is not in our control. But from within this first level, art and philosophy bring forth a second level in which these organized activities are stripped of their pragmatic purposes and are put on display. In this way, art and philosophy, says Noe, put ourselves on display, revealing what we are. And crucially for Noe, the second level loops back on the first, allowing it to be investigated and reorganized, enabling us to emancipate ourselves from an imposed order. In his latest book, The Entanglement, Noe specified and expands on this basic thesis, summarizing it in the formula of an entanglement relationship between art and life. And I would say that from a theoretical point of view, I agree with Noe. As Emilio Garroni argued many years ago, meta-operativity, that is our ability to operate on operations to our organization, to our daily lives we want, is everywhere, is already present in any human operation, but in the case of art is dominant. And art, Garroni argue, makes us grasp our perceiving in the very act of perceiving, revealing ourselves to ourselves, very close to Noe. But for Noe, it's important that this entanglement is virtuous, that there is a reorganization of ourselves. Of course, behind Noe there is Dewey, doing and undergoing, or the intentional and unintentionality in Kant's aesthetic ideas, perhaps in the works of genius. There are a number of authors. But by stopping at this theoretical level, I think that Noe is perhaps exaggerating that role that art would play today, as if the conditions of possibility of the work of or performance were still acting undisturbed, even in the public, in today's society. Instead, I think, or I fear, that this mechanism has jammed today, that the entanglement that necessarily presides over the most effective artistic practices reveals to us how our social life, even when we engage with works of art, is rather marked by a tendency to disentanglement between the controllable and the uncontrollable, which fails to reorganize ourselves and our social imaginary. Our current forms of life are an obstacle to the fulfillment of the virtuous circle between art and life. Art hardly looks back, as Noe would have it, on our life, reorganizing it. In other words, I have the impression that we are witnessing a polarization of control and non-control, mostly deprived of their enhancing interplay. A deprivation that affects not only our relationship with the arts, but most of our life, making it hard to make meaningful experiences. The high following a hyper self-control workday does not nourish my ability to control new processable elements, expanding and enriching it. It is only an outlet for accumulated excessive pressure. The square, hyper-controlled by cameras, commercial establishment, police patrols can suddenly turn into an out-of-control battlefield with no short or long-term change in the sociality of the square. The square is cleaned up, and the following day, the cycle sterilely continues to repeat itself. The recent pandemic, out of control and therefore accompanied by draconian measure to control it, seems to have left no trace. The slogan, "We cannot go back to normal because normality was the problem," was quickly forgotten. The loss of control was not processed, assimilated. We have learned nothing from that experience. As with art, the uncontrollability has not looked back into our lives, reorganizing them. This is not to deprive entirely artistic practices of their critical potential, for no work or artistic practice can renounce in its making the intimate relationship between control and non-control, their continuous and dynamic enhancing interplays. Thus, it is its very existence that contradicts or belies what it possibly represents. However, the possibility of triggering an impact on the social imaginary is very limited. Art's meta-operative incursions on life do not leave their mark easily. Their traces easily vanish. Their impact on the reorganization of the social imaginary is dependent on other factors: activism, associations, the media, which can consolidate their art's critical potential to the point of hopefully reorganizing our common sense. Thank you.